Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ask the Expert webinar. Easily turn your automated explanation into a predictive model. My name is Tiago de Souza, and I will serve as your moderator for today's event. Now, I would like to take a moment to introduce our presenter, Andy Ravenna. Andy is a principal technical training consultant here at SAS. He's used SAS since 1985 and began teaching in 1988. He's been at SAS for over 30 years, starting in the QA department and then providing technical services beginning in 1996. In 2000, he started teaching SAS for the education division, and Andy now focuses on advanced analytics, statistical training, and SAS Via. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in chemical engineering and a master's in applied mathematics, minoring in statistics, both from NC State University. Go Pack. Andy, please take it away.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody. So today I want to tell you about automated explanations and also share with you how easy it is to turn them into something like a predictive model. I've got just a couple of slides just as a little bit of introduction to get us started to say, hey, what is exactly an automated explanation? And it's basically a really cool feature in SAS Visual Analytics that allows us to sort of understand the most important underlying factors for any particular target variable. Maybe you're trying to understand who's going to make a purchase and who's not, or who might default on a loan or who might not. What's important in terms of trying to explain that from our data? It does use a whole bunch of cool stuff behind the background. There's a whole bunch of AI running around, and it also supports several different languages. So it's very, very powerful. It's really designed for business analysts, data scientists, even executives who are just really trying to grasp, hey, I've got this target variable, this response variable, and I've got all these explanatory variables. Which of these happen to be important? And an automated explanation is really sort of like a first step before we get into model building. So who would exactly use an automated explanation? Well, it's really just anybody who's trying to understand the difference or the what actually makes up a target variable. So we're trying to understand our customers better, our patients better, your taxpayers, whatever kind of data you happen to be looking at. So whether you're a business analyst or a data scientist, or even if you're a high-level executive, this is so point and click, so easy. You can get a lot of information very, very quickly. And I just have a simple example here. Maybe the head of a customer loyalty at a company is trying to understand, hey, what factors in my data are showing up that really affect how happy my customers are? What can we do with an automated explanation? Well, first of all, you're going to see with just really a minimal amount of effort, we're going to get a whole bunch of interpretable visualizations and even some automatically generated storylines. And I'm a firm believer in that being able to tell a good story is how you connect with people. So being able to use an automated explanation to help you tell a story about your data is a great way for you to communicate with your peers. It does give us the most important underlying features for a target variable. So if you've got a lot of columns, a lot of data of information about your customers, and you're trying to figure out which one of these are important, automated explanation is going to help you with that. It also actually creates a relative importance score. And so you can see relative to all the other inputs, how important is this particular item? So is it very important? Is it not very important compared to those particular inputs that are very important? What are other things that we can do with an automated explanation? Well, it can also give you information about your high and low groups. So you can see what their relationship is in terms of our target variable. So who are those? We're going to be looking at data from a banking organization, a large financial services firm, and we're going to try to determine which one of our customers are going to make purchases with us. Are they going to get a loan with us? Are they going to get a credit card with us? We're trying to identify those customers that are going to make purchases with us. So if we could understand what affects them, what's most important, well, and which groups are most likely to make a purchase, then we can actually target our marketing towards them. You can also take this and get some predicted responses. And I'm hoping that at the end, I'm going to have enough time to show you something called an automated prediction as opposed to an automated explanation, but it's just as easy. And, the other thing that I like to think about automated explanation is this really is your first step in terms of sticking your big toe into the water and trying to understand what is a model and what makes a good model. And, if I'm interested in starting to build models, can I go very easily from an automated explanation into one of these models like a logistic regression or maybe even a decision tree? And the answer to that question is yes. In SAS Via, it's so easy to do. All right, well, that's going to take me to my demo. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen. Let's see if that looks like it's showing up. Yes. Awesome. Okay, great. Now, I just want to share with you that I am using SAS Via for Learners in order to show you this demonstration. And the data table that I'm using is also already preloaded into SAS Via for Learners. So for any of you who happen to be at a university or are a student and you want to be able to do what I'm doing for you this morning, you're going to be able to actually go right afterwards, log into SAS Via for Learners, and you can run through this whole demo yourself. And so that was one of the reasons I wanted to use Via for Learners for you. Now, if you don't have access to that, we're going to give you information so that you can go and play on your own version of SAS Via, perhaps at your company or wherever you've got access. Let me hide this little window. So I am currently in SAS Visual Analytics, and SAS Visual Analytics in its main core has three important pieces. Over here on the left-hand side, I've got what we call different panes. So I've got a data pane, and I actually have some objects over here, and I can open that up. Over here on the right-hand side, I've got things like options, and I can also do things like create filters. So I've got those two side panes. And then right here in the middle, this is what I consider our workspace area, even though technically for visual analytics, it's called the canvas. This is where we're going to build things. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I want to do everything from the beginning for those of you that might want to follow along in SAS Via for Learners, so you're going to be able to do that. So I'm going to open up here my data pane, and I'm going to say, you know what, I would like to add some data. And in Via for Learners, there's already a table that is loaded called the VS Bank data table. And this is that bank data that I was talking about, where we've got information about customers. We're trying to figure out who's going to make purchases or who's not. Now, there's two tables loaded in here. They're both exactly the same. I'm just going to select the first VS_bank table, and I'm going to add it into Visual Analytics. And then we'll see that the data pane opens, and it basically takes all of the columns and it splits them up between categorical items and measures, or what we like to think of as continuous variables. And I've got a whole bunch of data. I'm going to explain some of the data as we're going along. But before we get started, it turns out that I've got more columns that I need. And because I don't want the automated explanation to use all of the columns, I'm going to hide some of those columns. So here's what I'm going to do first. I'm actually going to scroll down and I'm going to show you that our target variable is down here under the measure list. It's called target binary new product. And that's just really a column of zeros and ones. A one is an indication that this customer made a purchase. A zero means that they did not make a purchase. Well, because it's made up of zeros and ones, Visual Analytics thinks that it should be a measure, but we actually want that to be our response variable. So I'm going to do a right mouse button click on that. And I'm going to say, you know what? Very easily go ahead and convert that into a category for me. And then, sure enough, it's going to pop up here in my category list, and you can see that that particular target has two levels. It's made up of zeros and ones. So that's great. But now I want to start hiding the items that are not going to be useful for my automated explanation. So I'm going to select the ID because that's just got too many levels to it. I'm going to do a right mouse button click and I'm going to say, you know what, let's hide that so that my automated explanation does not use it. And then I've got a whole bunch of other variables that I kind of want to get rid of. So I'm actually going to go here to the More menu on the upper right corner of the data pane. And I'm going to say, you know what, let's open up Show or Hide Data Items. So there are several items that I want to go ahead and hide. I've got some demographic information that I'm not interested in, and I'm going to do a shift click all the way down to this demographic information. I'm going to say, you know what, take all of those items and pull them out. I'm really only going to hold on to the demographic of the imputed customer ages. We're also going to get rid of home value and income, recoded income, and we're going to hold on to the recoded and, oh, you know, actually I want to get rid of home value as well, so let's move that one over. So I really only want these two demographic pieces of information, the customer age and the recoded and imputed incomes. Then I've got a whole bunch more that I want to get rid of. So I'm going to start at frequency and I'm going to do a shift and a down arrow. And I'm going to go all the way down until I get to this list of variables that starts with log I RFM, because those are the ones that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all these. I want to keep all of these. These are actually the continuous variables that have been log transformed and imputed. So I've already done data cleansing for us, so you and I don't have to worry about that. And this is information like the average sales that the customer made over the last 3 years, or the customer tenure. All of that's going to be really good information in trying to explain whether or not a customer is going to make a purchase. Now, I do also have some other dirty data. This is the original data. We want to get rid of all these RFMs. And so I'm going to move those over. And finally, I've got a couple of other target variables that are associated with this table that I don't need. All right, so this is what I'm left with. This is the information that the automated explanation is going to use. So my target is the binary new product variable, the zeros and the ones, and I've got two categorical variables and a total of 14 measures. And so now we want to create the automated explanation. So what I did there was just showed you some visual analytics functionality in terms of hiding all of the columns that we don't want to use in our automated explanation. I could have also built a filter if I wanted to. I've got several different options in terms of how I might want to handle that. But right now, I'm going to build my automated explanation. So watch how easy this is. I'm going to do a right mouse button click over my target variable. And I'm going to say, you know what, let's explain that on the current page. All right. SAS Visual Analytics is going to go out and do some magic in the background. And ta-da, that's all I did. One click. And I'm now going to be able to talk about the relationship between this target variable and the explanatory variables. As I look here at the top at the summary bar, it says, what are the characteristics of my target? Well, it turns out that 0 is the most common value and 1 is less common at 19%. So it looks like about 20% of my customers were purchasers in this data. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that this entire report that I'm looking at is by default going to be based off of zeros because it was the most prevalent and it's selected here. But in all honesty, if we were in the real world, we're not interested in the non-purchasers. We're interested in the purchasers. So I'm going to select the 1 to basically recalculate and refit the report very quickly so that now it is based off of the purchasers as opposed to the non-purchasers. And for those of you that are already familiar with model building, things like logistic regressions, you know that the 1 is my event, right? That's what we're interested in. And we're already told here in the summary bar that the 3 most related factors are the count purchased over the past 3 years, the average sales over the lifetime, and the average sales over the past 3 years in response to a direct promotion. And you know what? That makes sense. It makes sense that looking at how many items a customer purchased in the past is probably going to tell us about the likelihood of making a purchase in the future. Now, what's also interesting is I now have a table here that is going to tell me, hey, what factors are most related to my target binary new product? And we'll see that the first 3 items that are listed here are the first 3 items that I was told about up here. And then, of course, as we start to look at the individual columns, we're probably going to ask ourselves a very natural question, right? Which is, well, you know what? If the count purchased over the past 3 years is the most important factor in determining whether a customer is going to make a purchase or not, what's the relationship between that one variable and my target? Well, you'll notice that that bar is already selected, and because it's selected, we already have a piece of information here that's going to answer that question exactly. What is the relationship between my target binary new product and the count purchased over the past 3 years? And we can see how it varies as the count purchased increases. And one of the pieces of information that I can get from this report is it's telling me, you know what? The average count purchased over the past 3 years is 1.6. So for my purchasers on average were purchasing from us 1.6 items. But here's the thing to keep in mind, and that is when I cleaned up the data, I actually did a log transformation. So we have to back transform that number 1.6. And in reality, it turns out that my customers purchased about 5 products on average. Okay? So that's kind of interesting information there, right? We can start to talk about the target in terms of our data. And I just really did a 1-click in order to get that information. Maybe we're interested in how one of my categorical variables might affect my target. Well, I've got a whole list of inputs here, including one of my categorical variables, which is the account activity level. So I'm going to select it, and the automatic explanation goes ahead and updates with answering that question. What's the relationship between my target and the account activity level? The account activity level is a categorical variable that has 3 values. It's got X customers, Y customers, and Z customers. My X customers happen to be my most active customers. and my Z customers are my least active customers. So as we would expect to see, here in my X customers is where I've got most of my purchasers, right? Their of course, if their account activity is very, very high, then they are much more likely to make a purchase. And that actually does make a lot of sense. So I'm going to go back and restore this chart so that it's selecting the item that is most related to my target. And the next thing that I want to show you is sometimes we want to sort of like know what's going on behind the scenes. How did VIA in Visual Analytics actually come up with this explanation? What's going on in the background? Can you give me any more details? Well, fortunately, with many of the objects that are available to you in SAS Visual Analytics, there is something called a detail table, but it's a little hidden away. And the way that you get to it is by going to this upper right-hand corner and clicking on the maximize button. And you're going to find this on all kinds of objects. If you're building models and you're doing a decision tree or a support vector machine, it's got a details table. The other way that I like to think about the details table is sometimes people ask me, hey, Andy, where are all the numbers that go into these charts? And I always say, you know what? They're in the detailed table. So I'm going to open up that table, and you're going to see that we're going to get all kinds of interesting information about my automated explanation. First of all, I've got an explanation description. And it says that what's the response that I selected for my automated explanation? Well, I actually selected this as my target. And then it also says that what were the screen factors? It turns out that the automated explanation, even though I may have already done some of my own data cleansing, it's going to do its own set of data cleansing and data cleanup. And you'll notice that the automated explanation modified or removed one of the 16 explanatory factors, and see the screening results tab for details. So you know what? Let's go over here to screening results just for fun. And this is going to show you what steps the automated explanation took to prepare your data for analysis. It might remove some variables, for example, that have a real high number of missing values. It's going to convert numeric columns that have very few distinct levels to categories, or it might even remove a geographic variables like latitudes and longitudes for analysis, which are going to be difficult. And if we actually scroll down in this list, we're going to see that there was one item that was modified. And it turns out that this variable, the count purchased over the past 3 years in direct response to promotion, was converted to a categorical variable because it has just a few distinct levels. Okay, that's interesting. All right, so that lets me know some of what goes on in the background. Let's go back to the explanation description and finish looking at what it's telling us. It says, you know what? How did we determine the most related factors? Well, that's kind of interesting. I'd like to know that. How did you figure out that this count purchased over the past 3 years is very important when it comes to explaining who's going to make my purchases? Well, it tells me here that the automated explanation used a one-level decision tree for each factor to determine its relative importance. Aha, a one-level decision tree. Now, that makes lots of sense to somebody like me who's worked with decision trees for a while now. But if you don't have any idea what a decision tree is, much less a one-level decision tree is, let me try to give you a good analogy. Let's suppose that we go on vacation to the beach house. I used to live in North Carolina. I used to love to go to the North Carolina beach, and we'd rent a beach cottage for about a week That was my dad, actually. I didn't pay for it. My dad paid for it a long time ago. And let's suppose we go to this rented beach cottage and the house is completely empty, and we all decide we want to cook something for dinner. And everybody decides they want spaghetti. Okay, well, the house is empty. What are we going to do? We're going to go to the grocery store and we're going to need to pick up some items. But if we were a one-level decision tree, that means we would go looking in the grocery store for the most important item that would give us dinner. And of course, what is that going to be? If we want spaghetti, well, I better pick up some spaghetti. So that one-level decision tree is going to say spaghetti is the most important thing for dinner, right? Now, of course, we could have built a two-level decision tree, and we could ask the question, after spaghetti, what are we going to pick up next in the grocery store? Well, we'll probably pick up some pasta sauce, right? But these are all one-level decision trees that actually make up the information that we're given here. So that is what leads to this relative importance tab. And as I shared with you, sometimes students ask me in Visual Analytics, hey, where are all the numbers? Well, the numbers are here in the details table. So you can see that the count purchased over the past 3 years has an importance of 1 because it is the most important explanatory variable for this particular target using a one-level decision tree. And then we can see that there are some of these other variables that come after that, which are pretty close to 1. So that means they are almost just as important. So this is just some useful information in terms of helping us understand or explain why somebody might make a purchase. And then finally, the last thing that I want to show you is on the anomalies tab. And this will tell us whether or not our automated explanation found anything unusual that it's trying to take into account for. And in this case, it did not find any anomalies. All right, I'm done with the details table. I'd like to close it up. So I'm going to go to the upper right-hand corner and I'm going to click on the Restore button. Now, before we get into actually building a model, there is one more interesting piece of information that the automated explanation can give me. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And so in the upper right-hand corner, I'm going to come up here and select and open up the options for my automated explanation. And I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to show you there's an option here that can give me the high and low groups. So I'm going to turn that on. And then just for the value of real estate so that we can see this a little bit easier, I'm going to turn my factors chart off. All right, that just gives me a little bit more real estate to see what's going on with this particular piece of information. So by turning on this high and low groups, we're going to get a brand new visual on our canvas of our automated explanation. And on the high tab, what we're actually presented with, so this is the high tab, is the 3 groups that are most likely to make a purchase. So let's actually examine the very first group here, which has an 80% predicted probability of making a purchase. So if the count purchased over the past 3 years is greater than or equal to 1.6, and the months since the last purchase is less than 2.6, so in other words, this customer made a purchase within the last 3 months, then the customer has a, well, did I go down to the wrong line? No, I was on the right line, yeah. Then the customer has a 80% predicted probability of being a purchase. So that's kind of interesting too. And what we have here is we basically have the automated explanation went and built some additional decision trees in order to give me these high groups and low groups. And sometimes I know that we're only interested in the high groups, we're interested in the purchasers. But one of the ways that I sometimes like to think about this is I also like to think about, you know what, if we look at the low groups and we can find a large population of those customers that are least likely to buy, and we can understand why we're not selling to them, we could maybe turn a big group of non-purchasers into purchasers. So I also think sometimes it's very interesting to look at those customers who are not making a purchase and trying to turn them around. Say, hey, you know, what's going on with these people that maybe we could entice them to buy something. All right, we've spent enough time with using the automated explanation, and now I want to show you how easy it is to turn this into an actual model. I'm going to take this automated explanation and I'm going to turn it into a logistic regression. Watch how easy this is. I'm going to go to the upper right-hand corner, which is the object menu, and I'm going to say, you know what? I would like to change my automated explanation into a logistic regression. So I'm basically making one click, and all of a sudden I've got a logistic regression. I'm always astounded at how easy it is to create models in SAS Via. And you've just seen that it's just a couple of clicks and I have already built a predictive model. And as a data scientist, being able to quickly explore my data and efficiently build models is very, very important to me. Let's just take a quick look at these logistic regression results, and then I'll try to show you one more thing. Now, one of the options that I want to take advantage of is because I've got a lot of stuff on the screen here. I want to maximize my real estate. So I'm going to go up to the options for this logistic regression, and I'm going to scroll down under this model display category, and I'm going to change the plot layout from fit to stack. And basically all that says is take each of those 4 charts that we just looked at and put them on a separate tab. Okay, so now I've got a lot more space here. Now along the top, you can see that I built a logistic regression of my target. I'm modeling an event of 1, so I'm modeling my purchasers. That's important. I have a model fit statistic for the KS by default is showing 0.55. And for those of you that are familiar with the Kolmogorov-Smirnov statistic, you know higher is better. So if I want to compare this logistic regression to another model, I've got several different model fit statistics. We can also see that all of the observations in this table were used. So there's actually about 1 million observations in this data table. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. And this is the fit summary panel, which is going to reveal to me that 14 of our 16 effects are significant at the 5% level. So this line here represents the 5% level, and the long blue bars are significant. And anything that's in black here is not significant at 5%. So I've got 2 inputs here that are not significant to this model. So for those of you that are already familiar with building models, you probably realize we might want to do some sort of variable selection technique and actually remove those inputs that don't appear to be significant. I also have an odds ratio plot. Odds ratio plots are really, really cool. Let's just look at one of these numbers here. This is the count purchased over the past 3 years. Hey, remember that was my top explanatory variable? That's got an odds ratio of 6. So what does that mean? That means that for each additional product one of my customer purchases, that customer is 6 times more likely to make a purchase. Hey, that's pretty interesting, okay? So that's got a really strong effect there. I'm going to go over to the residual panel. And basically here, I'm looking for outliers. I don't see anything unusual, so that makes me happy. And then finally, I've got an assessment tab. And on my assessment tab, we're going to start by looking at a confusion matrix where I can see here the predicted and the observed. This is telling me how well my model is making predictions. And you can see that I have almost 82,000 purchasers that were correctly identified. I can also go to the diagonal here, which is going to talk about how well my model is modeling non-purchasers. And we can see that it actually correctly identified over 800,000 non-purchasers. Now, this is not the only model assessment plot. For example, if I wanted to, I could do a right mouse button click, and I could show you that we've got lift charts, rock charts, cutoff plots, misclassification. Just for fun, I'm going to quickly pull up a rock chart, because for those of you that are familiar with receiver operating characteristic charts, you know you want a nice big fat curve that goes to the upper left-hand corner. We want a really big fat curve that's going to this upper left-hand corner for a model that is performing well. And we can use this rock chart once again to compare against another model, and then the model that had the fattest curve, the biggest curve, would actually be the better performer. Okay, so I actually went in and chose the model that I was interested in producing. But in these last 5 minutes or so that I want to talk with you before we jump into seeing if there are any questions, I'm going to say, let's present ourselves with a different question. Let's suppose that we're just starting and I don't want to build my own model. Maybe I'm not that familiar with models and what they mean. And this doesn't mean, Andy was talking about a logistic regression. I don't know really what he's talking about, but I'd really like to be able to make predictions. How can I do that? Well, fortunately, there is also something called an automated prediction, as opposed to an automated explanation. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back over to my data pane. Going to open it up, going to do a right mouse button click on my target variable, and I'm going to say, you know what, let's actually predict this, but let's predict it on a new page. So I'm going to put this on a brand new page. And now SAS Visual Analytics is going to go out and build an automated predictor for me. So over on the left-hand side, you're going to see all of the inputs, and they have default values placed in them. For the continuous variables, for example, it's actually putting like the average number in there. I think that's what it's doing. And so if I have a customer that has all of these values, what would we say, what would we predict about that customer? Would they be a purchaser or a non-purchaser? And you can see, using whatever's been placed in here, we would predict that this particular customer would be a non-purchaser. Okay, that would be the prediction. So how could we change this? Let's suppose we go in, and you know what, I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to say I have a new customer that's coming in, and they happen to be a customer value level of A. So my customer value level is a categorical variable that has 5 levels, A through E, where A is my most creditworthy, my most profitable, my most interesting customers, and E are my least interesting customers. I thought in this data it was very nice that they didn't give anybody an F, because when I was growing up in grade school, if you got an F, that meant you failed. But here our customers are all A through E. So I'm going to change my customer. I want to make a prediction. I'm going to say, suppose I've got an A customer. And then, the other thing I'm going to change is, let's go up here. We found out from my automated explanation that the count purchased over the past 3 years is the top most important variable in explaining whether somebody's going to make a purchase or not. Let's bump this number up from like a 1 to a 2 and hit enter and watch what happens. All of a sudden, now I've found myself a purchaser. So you can imagine that somebody could use this screen, and basically, if they have a new customer, a new patient, whatever coming in, and I've got information about them, I can fill out the values and I can make a prediction about them. Now remember, for those of you that want more details, we would open up the details table. So for those of you that are going, wait, how did you do this magic, Andy? What's going on in the background? Where are you getting these predictions from? Well, let's open up the details table and see what's going on. We can see here that in order to find the champion model, the prediction is using a logistic regression champion model. This model was automatically selected from a comparison of a decision tree, a logistic regression, and a gradient boosting model. This model was chosen because it had the highest accuracy. So now we know that what happened in the background was VIA went out, it ran 3 different models. It looked at the model accuracy, which is one of our model fit statistics, and it picked the model that was the most accurate. And in this case, it was the logistic regression. So that's pretty cool. So hopefully I've shown you something that is interesting today. I want to encourage you, if you have access to SAS Via for Learners, that you can actually go out and try this on your own. That data table, the VS_bank data table, is out there. You can go out there and play with this yourself. If you happen to be coming to SAS Innovate, I'm going to be doing a hands-on workshop on automated explanations, and it will be follow along. So you can come in, you'll get a computer, you can follow along with me, etc. So I would love to see you there, or you can just come up and say hello. I always love to see our users. So thank you very much. Let's see if we have any questions that are remaining or any questions that are coming up.
Thank you. Yes, with that, we will be moving into the Q&A segment of the webinar. Just a quick reminder on how it works. If you would like to ask a question, simply type it into the yellow Q&A widget located at the bottom of your screen. We would also love your feedback on our webinar today, so please take a moment to fill out a quick survey by clicking on the purple survey widget, which is also at the bottom of your screen. It's only 4 questions and should only take a minute to complete. Your feedback is super valuable to us, and we will use it to shape future webinars. All right, Andy, now on to our first question here. In what version of SAS Visual Analytics did automated explanations become available?
That is a very good question, and I would actually have to go look that up. I know they've been around for a while, so I think it was one of the early versions. I know it was back in VIA 3.5 or earlier. So I'm going to say pretty early on. I would be, if you're working on visual analytics and you do not see an automated explanation, I'm guessing you have a really, really early version of VIA. I can't promise you that it was out originally, but I know it was very early on.
Gotcha. Thank you. Another question here. Is Visual Analytics part of the basic SAS package?
It depends on what version of SAS Via that you have. However, if you have access to, I think, even just like the very basics of SAS Via, you've got things in addition to SAS Studio, you're going to have access to Visual Analytics. So it's, I know that in SAS Via, it's sort of like a tiered package, but Visual Analytics and the automated explanation and the automated predictions are all part of that base part of Via. So if you've got access to Via and you can open up Visual Analytics, you're going to be able to get to automated explanations.
Thank you. Someone's asking, how is association between explanatory variables shown?
So by default, you might remember, I'm actually going to go back to here. Where was my other report? Am I missing a tab here? Oh, you know what? Forgot to close my details table. That's what I was looking for. So, oh yeah, I switched this into a logistic regression. Let me show you another cool feature of Visual Analytics. There's an undo button. Let's see if that's gonna, oh no, that undid that one. All right, let's just do this very quickly. Let's just build another one very quickly. Let's explain this on the current page. And you might remember, so we're trying to understand how is it telling me which of these inputs are related. If you open up that details table, you'll see that there are one-level decision trees that are used in order to determine which of these are the most significant. So it's a one-level decision tree.
Thank you.
Yes.
The next question we have here is a little long. They're asking, could you talk about the data set used and best practices for data set building for automated explanation? For example, is it aggregated at the customer level, meaning each record is one customer and then the stats in the record are based on that customer's history?
So that's a good question. So you want raw data. You don't want aggregated data for your automated explanation, because it's going to go in and it's going to be able to do the aggregation for you. So yes, so this table, the particular table that I use, the VS_bank table, it turns out that each row is a unique customer. So we have, one row per customer. So we have over a million customers in there, and a million independent customers. If you don't have, if your data, I would not, if I had data that had multiple rows per customer, I would not want to do that aggregation myself. I would want to let the automated explanation do it.
Thank you. Someone's asking, is the automated explanation function included in SAS Enterprise Guide?
Oh, that would be nice, wouldn't it? No, I'm afraid it's not. I'm an old Enterprise Guide user, so I know a lot of you are SAS coders. So I went over to the dark side. I started in coding and I got into Enterprise Guide, and that was sort of my first venture into like using point and click features and finding out how useful and how they can help me and sometimes allow me to get a report much more quickly than writing code. So I'm totally with you. The automated explanation is not available there to you, unfortunately, from Enterprise Guide.
Thank you. We have another question here. Is this model the best model with the best performance? I guess we could reword it to be, how can we tell if a model is the best model with the best performance?
Yeah, so if you really want to start getting into model building, then what you'll want to do is you'll want to produce your own models like I did, like I created that logistic regression. And we would start by building a logistic regression, and then we might choose 2 or 3 other models to consider. If we want to stick with Visual Analytics, that's going to be the way to go. So I could build, let's say I build a logistic regression, a now I'm thinking, all of a sudden I lost my train of thought. I'm going to start with the logistic regression. I'm going to do an ensemble of trees like a forest, and I'm also going to do a neural network. And I've got those three models here in Visual Analytics. There is something called the model comparison object. And the model comparison object is way down here under this list of my statistics options. It's right there. And so that model comparison object will then allow me to compare those three models using my favorite model fit statistic. Whether I want to use the KS statistic or the C statistic, it will share with me what the champion model is. Now, I will mention one other thing, which is if you are really into building models and you want to build a whole bunch of models very, very quickly and then find the champion model, you might want to take a look at something called Model Studio. Model Studio allows you to build pipelines. And within those pipelines, you can have several different models and you can build them very, very quickly. So sometimes the way that I like to talk about this is that if you want to get down and dirty into your own models and then start to pick your champion model, you may want to stick here to these objects in Visual Analytics. If you don't really want to get too down and dirty into the models, but you basically just want to take a whole bunch of models, throw them at the wall and see what sticks, Model Studio has some great features that will allow you to take that and do that. So the automated explanation is using a one-level decision tree. So that's going to give me some useful information to start. But if you really want to pick like which is the best model, you're going to have to do a little bit more work.
Thank you. Someone's asking, what other objects are available in SAS Visual Analytics?
That is a great question. And I will just show you, if we scroll up to the top here, you can see that it's got tables so that you can look at tables of your data. It's got different graphs like bar charts and bubble plots and heat maps, time series plots. There are also geomaps if you've got geographic data. And then if you're into building dashboards where you want to put a whole bunch of different charts together and have them interact, it's got controls. It's also got these basic analytics that are available to you, so it'll do some forecasting. But just to let you know, with the the easiest or the simplest version of SAS Via, they'll give you some information, but you don't have a lot of flexibility. So if you really came to me and said, Andy, I need to do forecasting really bad, we could start here, but then we're going to want to look at other things, just to let you know that. There are also containers and content. And then down here, we've got a list of statistical objects. So things like non-parametric logistic regressions. We also have some machine learning objects like forest and gradient boosting. So there are all kinds of different objects available in Visual Analytics. And depending on what version of VIA you have, you're going to get more and more functionality.
Thank you. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions today. But before we go, I do have a couple of reminders for you. First, if you're looking for an in-person opportunity to connect with others, we've got just the thing. It's SAS Innovate 2025. It's our premier conference for business leaders, technical users, and SAS partners. We'll have inspiring keynote speakers, practical hands-on workshops, insightful breakout sessions, and much, much more. Andy will be doing some hands-on workshops himself at SAS Innovate, including one that's on today's topic. It's all happening from May 6th through May 9th in Orlando, Florida. You can visit sas.com/innovate to learn more and to register. On behalf of myself, Andy, and all of SAS, we really hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.